Welcome to Season 2 of Schoolin' Around, a podcast hosted by Branching Minds, featuring prominent leaders, subject matter experts, and thought innovators with their perspectives on the current challenges facing K-12 education. I'm your host, Larissa Napolitan, a former teacher, instructional coach, and a member of the Branching Minds team, here to lead conversations with educational leaders and experts, and to shine a light on phenomenal educators and those that are on a mission to transform our schools and the lives of students. Maybe you've been listening for a while, or this is your first episode. If you like what you hear, would you do us a favor by rating and reviewing us on iTunes? This is a fantastic way to tell us you enjoy what we are creating. Also, if you want more MTSS resources, sign up for our weekly newsletter using the link in the show notes. As educators, specifically within an MTSS practice, it's not just enough to identify that students need support. You have to have the right interventions. When choosing interventions, educators need to know whether it will work with their students. For our MTSS Explained episode this week, we are digging into what makes for great interventions and highlighting a few interventions for reading and math. And as always, thanks for listening. It is my pleasure to welcome Rachel Butler, who is a former special education teacher, but now she is a content specialist here at Branching Minds working on the learning science team, and she is here to talk about interventions. Welcome, Rachel.
Hi, thank you for having me.
I always love having you on the podcast because you and I started at the same time at Branching Minds,
I
and
know.
so I feel like a kindredness to you.
We're buddies for sure.
So you're here to talk about interventions, and I think interventions are one of the major parts of MTSS. And I'd like to just kind of start talking about what makes a good interventions. Like, what is it important for us to know about having good interventions for teachers within the schools?
Yeah. Well, one of the most important aspects to choosing a good quality intervention is to look at the research behind it and figure out whether or not it has proven to be successful previously. One of the ways you can do this is to check the intervention against the ESSA tiers of evidence. And the tiers of evidence provide districts and schools with a framework to determine which interventions can work and with which students they recommend those interventions to be used for, and kind of in which contexts they can be successful.
So, like, are there like factors to kind of consider in those like evidence, the ratings, I guess?
Definitely, yeah. The ESSA tiers of evidence really it's looking at 5 different factors of an intervention and of the studies that have been done on that intervention. So it's the design of the study, the results of the study, the findings from any related studies, the sample size and setting of the study, and how the students and the setting of the study overlap or match or line up with your own school or district. And that kind of can give you a good idea of whether or not this intervention can be successful with your own population.
You know, I think in thinking about that, it makes a lot of sense to really consider because there's a lot of evidence out there for certain types of interventions or programs or say instructional strategies, but like if you don't consider how and where it's been researched and like what are the factors within the research, it it could not work, right? Like at your own setting if it's not the same. I think at our summit, one of the speakers talked about that of just like there's lots of great interventions or things that have evidence behind them, but the evidence may not line up with your own local factors. And so that's a big thing to consider. And that's a lot for a teacher to like find, right? Like when we're
Yeah.
kind of used to finding great instructional things on Pinterest or teachers pay teachers. Not to knock, there's some good stuff on teachers pay teachers, but there's
Mhm.
also a lot of stuff they don't put the ESSA tiers on there. I don't think.
Yeah, I don't think I've seen that there before. There's a couple resources I can share that you can be helpful for finding these ESSA tier levels, and kind of will give you a little bit more information about the studies that have been done on this intervention or whatever intervention you're looking for. So, one of those is called What Works Clearinghouse. That is a really good website. You can search by the name of the intervention or the program they are looking for. You can also use it to kind of browse or shop around if you wanted to do it that way, to figure out what all is out there. And then another one that I like is a website that's called Evidence for ESSA. And that's a good one too for either browsing, or you can search for a specific intervention if you want to know what they have as far as the research base there.
Mm. I think that, like, that would probably been helpful to know as a teacher, but
Mhm.
or even as, like, my role as an instructional coach, like, when I'm looking into different types of resources or instructional strategies to or interventions to provide to my teachers, like, having a place where I can make sure what I'm finding will be actually helpful and is evidence-based and not just looks
Mhm.
pretty or, sounds like it will work, because, like, having the solid background of, like, this has worked in this context and this is how we can apply it, is really helpful for teachers. Anything else someone should know about, like, good interventions? I know you've spent a ton of time, like, thinking about researching, looking at all kinds of different stuff with interventions. Like, that is a big part of your job. So, for maybe the educator or the administrator or even the teacher out there that's listening that doesn't have that same amount of dedicated time, what would you say is some things to consider in looking for good interventions?
Well, I think some other things you should consider when you're choosing an intervention for your specific school or class or student is definitely the background knowledge that you have of the student, their English proficiency level, what you may already know about the student, like what does or doesn't help them out, any data or information that you have from previous years, previous teachers, any other people that are working with them, like if the psychologist has any information or the speech language pathologist. You should have a great team of people at your schools, and it's a great resource to tap into them as well when you're kind of trying to narrow down your interventions.
A surprising factor is a school psychologist has a lot of information or, like, they do a lot
Mhm.
of, like, research and they have a broad understanding of learning and how students learn or how kids learn, and I've learned a lot from different school psychologists we've had on the show and then also from Trudy Bender, and so just that idea of, like, they actually have really great stuff to offer, teachers, and that's a big part of their job is to staying up on the research, like, they have for their licensure, I think they
Yeah,
have to.
definitely.
Okay, so you do a lot of work around interventions. Are there a few interventions that you can kind of think of that maybe like you're like, oh, these are good solid ones. They're maybe free or easy, not I wouldn't say easy to implement, but like they're just some for like math or reading. What are two that kind of come to mind?
Sure. One of my favorite literacy intervention strategies is called reciprocal teaching. This intervention, it's primarily used for reading comprehension, but actually, I think you could probably use it to help with comprehension in any content area. With this strategy, the students are taking on the role of the teacher. So after you read a text or you go over a concept, the students break out into small groups, and kind of one of them takes on the role of teaching and leads the small group discussion about what they have learned. And as I said, this helps with reading comprehension, but it also helps with a lot of great social skills. It's promoting teamwork, it's giving the students practice with taking turns, working within an assigned role that they've been given, leading discussions, asking questions of each other. Great skills to have there.
I love that one because, I think I used to use that as an English teacher is, like, we'd read the text and then, like, breaking up to small groups and, like,
Mhm.
how even having students talk about a piece of text in their own words or in their own, like, within a group, they may come out with nuggets that like, you didn't foresee because they all process things differently, and they all bring their own set of, like, knowledge or experience with them, and so that's kind of a great one, and you're right, I think that that could be in any content area, that's a great strategy.
Yeah.
And I wanna clarify, like, there are some interventions that can be used as learning supports or learning strategies at like whatever tier level. Like sometimes it doesn't matter, like you can tweak them. I think that's a kind of common misconception is that like there are some stuff that's just like good differentiated instruction, but then you can apply it at different tier levels for different ways. Am I correct in saying that?
Yeah, yeah, I think and it's kind of a broad intervention, that one. I think you can definitely tweak it or modify it a little bit to work for different classes that you have or even different groups. Maybe the teacher can be kind of circulating and working with groups in different ways depending on what the students in those groups need.
So how about math? Do you have one for math?
I do. One math intervention that I like is called a customized self correction checklist. And this is really a self monitoring tool that a student can use. So the teacher is first kind of analyzing and figuring out what areas of struggle or where does the student kind of get tripped up when they're solving a specific type of math problem. And then the teacher creates a customized checklist for the student so that when they're doing those problems, they can kind of follow along and check off the steps and make sure they're doing it correctly. And then that helps them learn the process. And of course, the teacher is regularly checking in, reviewing the checklists at the end of the day or whenever. But I think this strategy is great because it also does help the student take on ownership over their own learning as well.
Mm. And I think that could be applied at several different levels in different ways.
Mhm.
And the intensity of the checklist maybe varies, like, based on student and based on, like, the concept that you're looking at. So, that's a great one.
Yeah.
Okay. I love talking about specific interventions because it makes me think of, like, just my experience in the classroom of like, "Oh, yeah, that was a great one. I love doing that one." I just it always makes me think of that. I know that we talk on the podcast a lot about students' behavior and mental health. And so, do we have any kind of like interventions for upper grades? Because I know secondary always needs good ideas or just evidence based things that are like, what could work here?
Yeah. Well, recently we partnered with the JED Foundation and we created 5 activity sets for high school students. So, JED is a foundation that is really based on helping teens and young adults to learn resiliency and life skills and kind of encourages them to be socially connected and seek out help when they might need it. So, we worked with their team to develop 5 sets of activities that are based on skills that the JED Foundation has identified as being crucial for graduating high school students. So, the skills are communication, diversity and inclusion, relationship skills, empathy and critical thinking, and self awareness. The activities in there are all research backed and they're all available in the Branching Minds library currently. And they will soon be available for anyone to download for free from the Branching Minds website.
Those are great. I think that like anything that we can help students learn about, those relationship skills,
Mhm.
empathy, communication. I know as a middle school teacher, like, I found myself a lot of times I'd stop in the middle of a lesson and, like, just kind of go, "Okay, let's talk about life skills here for just a minute." And I kinda go into this, like, not like lecture, but just be like, "This is something you need to know as a human being and as a person." And so I think that is always a needed thing for, secondary because 'cause they're just trying to figure out who they are, who they are in the world, how to relate to other people around them. And as adults in their life, it's great to be able to impart that stuff to them and support them for those things. So I look forward to that download. So Rachel, thank you for being here and talking about interventions.
Thank you for having me. This was so fun.
Thanks for listening to Schoolin' Around, a podcast hosted by Branching Minds. Go ahead and subscribe to our feed wherever you listen to podcasts. And don't forget, if you are enjoying our content, would you do us a favor and rate and review our podcast on iTunes? This helps others find our podcast and lets us know how much you love what we're creating. Branching Minds is an educational technology company using learning sciences and technology to help districts effectively personalize learning through MTSS. To learn more about us, check out our website, branchingminds.com, or follow us on Twitter, Facebook, or LinkedIn at Branching Minds.